Hi everybody, this is Dr. Chris Dost. Welcome back to the Biblical Languages and Literature channel. Before we get into our video for today, I just want to share with you a few upcoming courses that Sabra Global Education is offering. The Dead Sea Scrolls and the New Testament, which will be taught by Dr. Jeffrey Garcia of Alliance University, will also meet 1 hour a week for 4 weeks, and that course begins in late April. In addition, Rabbi Dr. Robert Harris of the Jewish Theological Seminary will be teaching a 1 hour per week ongoing course in the book of Isaiah. And the course is entitled The Book of Isaiah from Yesterday to Today. And this will be an expositional study of the book of Isaiah with some rabbit trails off into medieval exegesis, both Jewish and Christian. And then finally, I'll be teaching the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, an introduction. And that course is an ongoing course which meets 1 hour per week as well. We hope to see you in class. All right, let's get started.
Right. So we see that whatever the rabbis were doing, beginning with the Mishnah and its requirements in the generations after the destruction of the temple, we see at least implicitly they are redolent of the Paschal meal the Jews were celebrating while the temple still stood. So at least in the last days of the Second Temple, for our course's purposes, the life of Jesus, right, in the 1st century CE. So that the question is, how do we understand them? And what I think we left, what I want to make sure that we mentioned, in case it wasn't clear, that for Rabban Gamliel in the generation or so following the destruction of the temple, not at all certain about the future of actually eating the sacrificial meal with the temple no longer standing, because remember, as of Deuteronomy's incorporation, the Paschal meal was no longer something you did in your backyard, but something that had to be done in conjunction with the Jerusalem temple. So he turns this into a spoken liturgy, right? Anyone who does not say these 3 words, right? Later it's added to lift them, to explain them, right? But Rabban Gamliel is not talking about eating them. Remember, it was the 4 questions, originally the 3 questions that talked about the eating or the dipping to eat, right? The Paschal meal or the matzah and etc. So that's where we were. And I think we mentioned that, again, this is the only place with respect to the original 3 questions that you'll find the 3 remaining objects together as a threesome, I could say, as a trinity with love, that Christians, of course, turned into, very, very important symbolic, recreations of the Last Supper. That's where I wanted to pick up, so that the idea of this Paschal meal needing to find a new form in the 2nd century and beyond, and is what we're going to be looking at, and how this was done in Christianity versus how this was done in Judaism, right? So let's move on. I want to go back to the purpose of answering that question once again to this central phrase in Christian liturgy, which comes, as you'll call, from the book of John, right? The behold the Lamb of God. So that from the get-go, if you will, Christians, or again, the original Jewish circle around Jesus that was later expanded into, the Acts of the Apostles, post, original story, Gentile Christians, right? That for them, Jesus becomes the Passover, right? Ergo, the things that Jesus said at the Last Supper with respect to body and blood, with respect to the symbolic interpretation, or the actual, if you prefer, depending on which kind of Christian theology you follow, the Paschal lamb and the wine, the blood, so that wine and lamb. But there is no more lamb for the original Christians also. So there was, again, that substitution of bread, right? This is our bread, meaning the matzah, which was they were eating, right? So matzah and wine, and there you got two of the three major symbols for the Seder. So after that, there's a more serious bifurcation and interpretation in different directions. So for the rabbinic Seder, they take this phrase, which we saw at least once early on, ha lachma anya, which is Aramaic for behold the bread of affliction, or if you prefer, behold poor man's bread, right? And both interpretations are found in the tradition. Anya, meaning it's not clear if that's from the word ani, meaning poor, or inui, meaning tormenting, right? And both, it's so old that we don't know which one for certain. We only know that there was an argument about it for about 500 years until they said, you know what, let's do both. And we'll come back to that, I think, later today. But so for now, this is the bread of affliction. And again, it is lifted. And the implication is eating it will bring you redemption, just like it brought redemption to ancient Israel. So the question is how, right? For a Christian in the Eucharist, it's through the actual consumption of these symbolic foods, and so too for the Jews. But where Christians will recall the life of Jesus as Christ, the Jews go to the story of slavery and the redemption from slavery in Egypt. So one is sort of a more recent and then a future implication. For the main part, the rabbis look backwards, except here. And it's so interesting that now that we read it, we can see that it's really talking about the future as well. Today we are here, next year in the land of Israel, taken symbolically or actually, it doesn't matter. Today we are slaves, next year we are free. No, we're not slaves now. As the Haggadah will later make clear, it's because of God's redeeming Israel from slavery in antiquity. And if he had not, we and our children would still be slaves. We see that as like a refrain. So what does it mean? Now we are slaves. We put ourselves back into that moment in our dim, ancient history in order to reenact the redemption. And we are redemption by drinking wine and eating bread, right? So you see the overlay. It's just stunning, right? For all that Christians and Jews would, either be suspicious of one another or hate one another or, pogroms, all the worst things. The core rituals are things that we are fighting over, or we could say more lovingly, enjoying in parallel, in tandem, which is the way I like to think about it, right? At any rate, so we have this prayer. We open up the Seder with these words. And again, the actual words, if you'll recall, this is what this one rabbi said every time he sat down to have a meal. He knows that there were poor people. And the idea of inviting people to enjoy our bounty is absolutely part and parcel of the Seder meal. And it's something we, through our support of worthy causes or actually inviting people to our table, something that we should do. At any rate, again, for Jews, it's hard to see this sometimes because we see them as separate. But right after that, we have the Kiddush, our first cup of wine. Okay, so, and what do we say? Now, here is one of these moments when we're drinking that wine, we're not thinking about, obviously for us, we're not thinking about Jesus and his Last Supper. We're commemorating the departure from Egypt, right? So our drinking of the wine is trying to channel a past redemption to enjoy a present and a future one, right? So it's hard to see it if you're not looking for it, because the Kiddush, we're going to say the Kiddush, and then we're going to have the motzi, and then we're going to, talk to Aunt Ethel down there in the corner who's visiting from Pittsburgh, right? It's hard to sometimes see that we're channeling absolutely the same themes that are part and parcel of the Christian Last Supper, and therefore of the Eucharist.